Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk Business. I'm your host Rick Jenkins and it is time for our featured guest here on this episode number 3 of Let's Talk Business. And our featured guest today is Curtis Loftis. Curtis is the state treasurer for South Carolina, and he is pretty much responsible for managing about $60 billion in funds. He's the state's banker. Curtis, welcome.
Good to be here, Rick. Nice to see you.
It is good to see you too, sir. We haven't talked in quite some time, so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, good.
Let's talk business. What do you say?
I'm all for it.
Okay, so, Mr. Treasurer, you are responsible for making sure that the state's credit rating remains good. How do you do such a thing?
Well, that's an exciting topic to start off on.
Yeah.
Make sure we don't put people to sleep. Credit rating is important because just like in your private life, you want to borrow money as cheaply as you can. And South Carolina is a conservative state, so we need to make sure we reflect that. So we deal with all of the credit rating agencies. There's 3 main ones on a regular basis. We're up there, they're down here. We talk to them probably on a weekly basis. We even hire a consultant or two that helps us with that. So South Carolina is a highly rated state, it's AAA state, and because of that, we're able to borrow money at the most advantageous rates. And then the groups under us, the cities and counties and universities, they all are affected by that high rate of ours. It helps them borrow money at less rates.
Right. You say you hire consultants.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that, but it makes sense. Tell me about that.
Well, it's a world to itself, financial advisors,
Yeah.
and they'll have, like our consultant probably has 10 states or 12 states. So they're in these buildings in New York, S&P, Fitch, the rating agencies, they're in there weekly. So it doesn't hurt to have that presence because we can't be there every week, of course.
Right. So tell me what South Carolina debt looks like.
We have very little debt. We are an under-debted state. In fact, we get lots of calls. I get lots of calls where I go, hey, why don't you be bond lawyers and bankers, why don't you issue some more debt?
Define very little debt.
We have about $150 million of general obligation debt. General obligation debt is the important debt that we talk about because that's the one that the taxpayer pays. Now, the universities have some debt, but that's paid back from revenue they receive or Ports Authority or different agencies. There's a revenue debt out there, but that's paid by people other than taxpayers. But to have only $150 million or less in general obligation debt is almost unheard of.
Yeah, I suppose I've never really thought about it, and until you said that number, I would have no idea what to guess. And so I suppose that my ignorance keeps me from understanding if that's good, bad, indifferent, or what. How does it compare to someone else? And I don't know how you might know this, but North Carolina, our neighbor, how does it compare to a neighbor, or how does it compare to a like-sized state from a population perspective?
To most states, it is much less. Now, there are a few states that have no debt because they'll have a lot of, say, mineral money, oil money, something like that. Nebraska, I think, has no ability to even have debt, if I remember right. I could be wrong about the state. It's one of those states because they have a lot of this mineral debt. So in South Carolina, what we do is we're conservative. We don't have a lot of debt. We've been paying it down. And all of a sudden, in the last 4 or 5 years, things have really turned for us. Not just as the economy being good, but all this COVID money. COVID money is everywhere. It just, every time we turn over a rock, there's COVID money. And much of the COVID money's not even been claimed by the state or people in the state yet. It's still in D.C. waiting to be sent out. So we've got all this money. Every time it's spent, there's sales tax. Every time somebody gets, say, a PPP loan on their property, maybe they build a house out of it. There's all sorts of things that happen, and then there's more tax revenue comes from that. So we have, last night in the bank, we probably had $40 billion, maybe $41 billion. Usually this time of year, it'd be $20 billion.
Mm-hmm. But I want to turn our attention now to a few things that I know the treasurer really likes to talk about. And we're going to start with probably the biggest thing, and that is the Future Scholar Program. Tell us, Mr. Treasurer, about the Future Scholar Program.
I love the Future Scholar Program.
I know you do.
It's a $6 billion program. People have a hard time understanding how big it is. If you put it in the ranking of South Carolina businesses, it makes a lot of businesses look small.
Right.
We have over 200,000 participants. The General Assembly has given me a great program to run because it's tax advantage. You beat the tax man 3 different times. When you fund it, works like an IRA kind of. You fund it, that's a state tax deduction right there. It grows state and federal tax free. And then when you pull it out for educational expenses, that's free too. So you start when a kid's zero and you start chunking a little money each month, you get those deductions. And if your granny makes a contribution, she gets that deduction. So it works out pretty well. A lot of people kind of use it for some tax considerations. But you take it out for college, take it out for trade school, tech school. You take it out for K through 12 private school tuition, including Christian school. So it's so flexible. Not just schools in South Carolina, but all around the country. You'd be surprised how quickly Harvard will grab that check because they want the money, and that's what it does. It allows you to save for money in a tax advantage way. It is by far the best program you can find, especially if you're a South Carolina resident. If you're from outside South Carolina, you don't get that state tax deduction. But because of that, that's one reason it's grown so quickly. And so we're really excited about it. It's just a great program.
Well, and I think it compares extremely favorably to programs in other states. I mean, when you look at comparisons, it's always considered one of the best, yes?
Yeah, we compete in the marketplace. We compete with for-profit businesses. We have some of the biggest banks in the world manage our programs, and they sell them for us on their big platforms. So we're very excited about it. You know, it's a great setup for people in South Carolina. Now the question is, how do you get somebody to start the plan? So we looked at it and we said, well, let's make it simple. So the computer forms, you go on the computer line, futurescholar.com, it's easy to set up. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It doesn't cost you a dime. You don't have to fund it right then. There are no fees. There aren't going to ever be any kind of opening fees or that kind of thing. So you set it up. So if you're smart, you set it up as early as you can, then you start funding it. Maybe if you just fund it $5 or $10 a month to get yourself started. But when you start talking to your granny and your uncle and your cousins and your best friend, they love to help other people with education. Like, I refuse to buy any of my nieces and nephews presents. They've got everything they need. I'm not going to do it. You know, I'm the grumpy old bachelor uncle now. I've been divorced a long time. But if they say, I'd like a little help with my college 529 account, I write that check just as quick as I can. Because why wouldn't I? It's something that matters. It's not that old blue sweater that you're always buying and people pass around. It really matters.
And so it can be used for any type of school. It can be used for a four-year institution or a 2-year technical college.
That's right. As long as they're accredited schools. I mean, there's thousands of accredited schools in South Carolina and the United States, and there's 680 is I think the last number I heard overseas. It's cordon bleu cooking schools. I am told, I have not verified this, but there's a golf school. You know, it's a real college in Florida.
Really?
Yeah, and of course we have that. You know, Coastal Carolina has that golf program. And did you know you have to play golf, to be in the golf school? You have to have a PGA card. I didn't realize that. Yeah, we had to work with it last month. So it's not like, hey, I like golf. I'd like to be in the golfing business. I'll go do that. No, you got to play.
Yeah, that's serious stuff.
It's really interesting. But so all those kinds of things you can do. If you want to retire and say you want to go, you're a young man, you can still go to say law school. Go to Pepperdine. Why not sit in Malibu and look at the Pacific Ocean every day? They're more than happy to take your money.
I'll tell you what, I'm not going back to school, but good thought anyway.
I can't imagine going back to school.
No, I cannot either, unless it's that golf school, but that's not going to happen either. So what other types of expenses can someone use these funds for, other than, of course, tuition and room and board?
Tuition, room and board, computers, all your normal type. I mean, you can go buy yourself a new car.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. You can't go to Paris and go to the Louis Vuitton store and buy your new book bag. You can't do that. Yeah. But the common sense type of thing, your lab fees, all that stuff. I used to know all this stuff by heart, but now I deal with big programs I can't remember. I should need to refresh my memory. But we're so fortunate that the federal government and General Assembly conspired to create this program, because this is one of the things that if all government was like this, conservatives like me would love government.
Yeah. You mentioned the website a little bit ago, but tell our viewers and our listeners how someone can go online and get this thing started.
Futurescholar.com, and if for some reason you can't get it, there's an 800 number. It rings here in the United States, and then you'll find an extremely knowledgeable person who will walk you right through it.
Very good. All right, let's move on to unclaimed property. Now, before we started talking, you brought in and you gave me this report that I am thumbing through right now. For those of you who are listening to on the radio, you can't see this huge report that I've got. But this lists people in South Carolina who have dollars waiting for them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you tell how all that works and where they might come from, but have dollars waiting for them if they just knew how to get it, if they just knew how to check, it might be there. And I'm looking at one guy, and I'm not going to say who he is, but he lives in Boiling Springs, and somebody owes him $230,000.
That's right.
Tell me about this.
This list is only Spartanburg County. It's 13.
Oh, that's Spartanburg County.
It's 13 pages, and everybody on this is more than $10,000. I mean, if we printed, say, from $1,000 to $10,000, we'd probably have 250 pages.
Goodness.
We have $850 million that belong to South Carolinians. That belongs to churches and charities, to banks, to government. Now, the average person is likely to have a $500 claim. That's the average. And 1 in 3 people have some money. And a lot of people don't check because they think they're just too smart. We're all too smart, right?
But explain what this is.
Yeah.
What are those dollars?
They could be anything from your water deposit when you left
That's
and
right.
forgot.
That's
It can
right.
be a overpayment on a car loan or a house loan or something like
Okay,
that.
now that's $86.
Yeah.
Right? That's $86. And you got 15 pages of people that are over $10,000. What could that be?
A lot of them were life insurance policies on their ex-wife that died, and they were still the beneficiary. And it was meant to be that way, but they just weren't involved in the actual transaction, so they didn't see it.
And they're not aware of it,
That's right.
potentially.
That's right. We had a case down in North Augusta recently. We owed a lady $566,000. Her father had worked for the railroad. He was a conductor. He died, and there was the money. So it came to us 20 years later, not 10 years, but 20 years later. Should have come at 10. We were auditing this firm, came to us. So I called her, talked to her for a minute. She thought I was a crook.
Of course.
Yeah. So her father had been a mason, so I called the head mason. Head mason, I know the old man. I'll call her. He called me back. Said she thought I was a crook.
Yeah.
Same thing with the state county treasurer. I sent the county treasurer down there. He's a great guy from Aiken, Jason Goins, and he said, Curtis, she thinks I'm a crook. She won't believe me. Well, I ran into Bill Hickson on the campus of the State House. And Bill was their House of Representative member. He said, Curtis, I've been in the House 100 times. I've been selling insurance for 30 years. Will you go? He went. He said, it took me 20 minutes to convince her and for her to finally say, Bill, if you think I should take this money, I will. Well, it starts off at $566,000. We always do another search, checking out, because money comes to us, it's lost. It's all numbers and names are crunched up and spelt wrong and all this stuff, right? So we found there's $200,000 in dividends. So she's at 766. Well, that's pretty good. And while we're doing the paperwork, and it takes a week or two to get all this done. While we're doing the paperwork, we get a letter from CSX. Hey, you owe this lady $566,000 in stock. Well, we assumed it was the same stock, but we didn't know.
No.
We always check
It was different.
if the stock had split. So it was 566 plus 556 plus 200,000. So she got over $1.3 million. And Hickson called me and said, you gonna call her? I said, no, we have somebody upstairs who's got a good relationship with her because she thinks I'm a crook. And you should never trust anybody on the phone. And when we call somebody, we never say, give us information. We say, hey, we've got some money for you. Go to this website, check it out. If you want to call your representative, if you want to call the governor's office, doesn't matter. Because it's our job to give it back. $850 million.
It would sound shady, though. It would sound shady to get.
Barack and Michelle Obama have money for them at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the White House,
You think?
from a health care insurance place. So it happens all the time. George Bush, Donald Trump. I had a Saturday afternoon, I went through looking at all those states. All these people have money. It happens to everybody. Find it. And while you're there searching at treasurer.sc.gov, treasurer.sc.gov, search for your friends, search for your pastor, search for your mom and dad. Because if you don't find anything for yourself, you still get to say, hey, Rick, guess what? I found $500.
Right.
And by the way, the treasurer told me, you owe me lunch.
You got it. Well, so what happens to those funds over some period of time? I would assume they're not going to sit there forever.
What we do is we have an actuary involved. We keep all of the money. So we have this $850 million. But we'll keep about $90 million in the house, the treasurer's office, so that we can pay claims out. Because see, we're going out across the country and bringing money in.
Right.
We're going to John Hancock and Bank of America and all these places and say, hey, you owe us money. Give us this money that belongs to us. And so some of that going. So about $750 we've already given to the state. Now, I have a claim on that money anytime. It's still in my possession, of course, because I'm the treasurer, have all the money. But they can build bridges and whatever they want to do with it in the meantime. But if we ever needed money to fund this, I just go grab it back. So your money's going to always be there. We've returned money from the 30s and 40s.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I can see why that's one of your favorite topics, because that's fun, right? That's good news.
Yeah.
That's
When I
good
have a
news.
hard week, my staff knows that on Friday afternoon, if it's been a hard week, I'm probably making a call or two on this because it is fun. And my sister and I, we gone out, we traipsed over fields through vacant houses, looking and finding people, and they're just always surprised, like, what are you guys doing here? We got money for you.
Yeah, right, right. All right, I'm going to get you out of here on this topic, and it's a big one. I saved this for last because I find it a little complex, and it's ESGs. I wasn't familiar with it being called ESGs. I'm familiar with the topic itself, but ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance Investing. And so before we jump into it, why don't you just tell folks what that means?
Well, it's supposed to mean it is a way to invest, and it's a way to invest for a long-term goal. That's what it's sold as, but that's not what it is. It is a speech and behavior code that the left has given us, and we accept it. They've done the same thing with diversity, equity, inclusion. They've done the same thing with the corporate equality index. When people look out there and say, why do we have all this Gay Pride Month in June? It's not because it's just spontaneous. Nothing you see is spontaneous. It's because scores of well-funded 501c3s and government entities went around to these businesses and they rate them on this stuff. And they say, what do you mean you didn't hire but X amount of gay people or X amount of black people, X amount of trans people? You've got to do better. You've got to double that. You've got to have a plan. You have to hire people. If you don't, and large investment firms won't buy your stock. If you don't, large banks won't lend you money. If you don't, you're going to get bad publicity. So it's the club, it's the carrot and the stick. But it is a speech and behavior code. And it is so important to understand that because what we're told constantly is it's just the way people invest their values. It has nothing to do with that.
Now, proponents of this would say that it encourages companies to act responsibly, right? Now, critics are going to say that it is something that exists to further political agendas, specifically, as you're saying, potentially from the left. But this has been around a long time. Mm-hmm. This type of thing has been around a long time. We discussed this before it came on air. It began, I don't know, back in the 60s at some point, but it has, over these last several years, really begun to gain steam, and people are becoming more and more aware of it. What has led to this becoming what it is today?
Well, it's been a long movement, like you said, but it never got much traction until 2008, the meltdown that almost melted down the world, right?
Yes.
That great economic dislocation. And what happened was that Occupy Wall Street and lots of other organizations like that made so much ground on Wall Street, on the investment banks, on the big global banks and stock houses, that one side, kind of the investor guy, said, hey, let's just join forces. We'll give you the S and the G. We don't care what you do. We'll hire as many of whatever kind of people you want. We don't care. What we want to do is we want the E. They call it the environment, but it's really energy. You control energy, you control the world.
Right, and just to reiterate,
Yeah.
the ES and the G, environmental, social, and governance.
That's right.
All right, keep going.
So the social is huge. It's the ones like Goldman Sachs will not take a company public unless it has a certain amount of people, types of people on each board. Well, what business is it of Goldman Sachs? You see what they've done? It sounds like, oh, they just want to make sure that everybody's represented. No. They now have taken the power of deciding who goes public and who doesn't go public. That is an immense amount of power and money. Because if Goldman Sachs passes, well then JP Morgan passes. And then Bank of America passes. So it's the gateway. They're saying to Rick's big company that's ready to move, ready to go public, you can't because you're a family organization. You don't have enough people of certain backgrounds or sexual preferences. What does that have to do with running your business?
How do you fight it?
It's not easy. I'm a Republican, so I love business. I was a businessman all my life, and I still think of myself as a businessman. But our votes are important. but our dollars are the most important thing we have. If we don't selectively use our dollars to fight this, we'll lose. And I've never in my life been afraid of anything. I mean, I'm old enough. I remember they taught us how to hide under our desks from the Russian bombs. Older siblings, but relatives and neighbor boys going to fight in Vietnam. We saw the towers. We saw all that stuff. America will go through. But this is different. They have put this layer of government, effectively, over the private world. And we're accepting it. It's not appropriate. We have people I read 2 articles today about the universities, how they're at each other's throats over things that happened 150 years ago. When we were in college, nobody had any clue that was an issue. They're dividing this country, and every statistic you look at, the amount in the middle and the working class people are taking it on the chin. Wages have been stagnant for 25 or 30 years. No savings, no retirement possibilities. Houses prices are going up, but their equity is going down. When are we going to turn around and say, we're tired of the world's richest people taking all the money? Because we're headed, ESG, DEI, Corporate Equality Index, all of these things is the pathway to a new feudalism with this massive worldwide organizations that run everything. And I sit in the meetings and have been on the phone calls with the Federal Reserve about the central bank Federal Reserve currency. They want to do away with the greenback. They want to tell you when you can spend your money and where you can spend your money. It's a terrible thing. We've got to use our dollars to say no.
You obviously are passionate.
I love freedom. And you know what bothers me the most? I know we're running late on time. You look at like the black population in South Carolina. Struggled, fought tooth and nail, and died to get out of slavery. And now, just in time when they finally got to the point, way too long, of being able to participate in the richest country in the world, we're taking the richest country in the world and making it poor. Black people now are living less long than they used to, along with white people. A black kid in 1958 reads and had a higher level in 1988, or 98, excuse me. We're backing up. We're taking away those hardcore rights and freedoms that were born. We cannot be a free and prosperous country if we don't have freedom. And that's what ESG is. It takes our freedom from us.
I can't think of a better way just to end it right there. Curtis, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate you being here. Folks, that is South Carolina Treasurer Curtis Loftis, and that wraps up another episode of Let's Talk Business. Appreciate you joining us. And again, every Saturday at 4 o'clock on 94.5 The Answer, also on all your most popular podcast platforms, and a weekly YouTube video series. We'll see you next time.